If you've been following all of the Epic Games and Apple drama lately, then you're probably already aware that a few days ago a court handed down a ruling that dealt a pretty big blow to Apple. And I want to give my thoughts about this whole thing because it's not just two businesses fighting over billions of dollars, there's also some changes that really do affect developers like you and I. And as long as something's a developer issue, then I'm definitely interested in it. For those of you who have absolutely no clue about the lawsuit and what led to it and how it went down and what the ruling was, don't worry, I'm going to cover that right now. So the origin of the lawsuit came about a year ago when Epic Games, with its popular game Fortnite, decided to bypass Apple's in-app payment system. And the reason this is such a big deal is because Apple requires developers to use their in-app payment system for digital goods. And when people make purchases for digital goods inside your app or your game or whatever, Apple will take 30% of that revenue. So after Epic Games introduced a way to bypass Apple's payment system, Apple decided to just delete Fortnite from the App Store. And thus the lawsuit was filed by Epic Games, asserting that Apple was engaged in monopolistic and anti-competitive practices. Now, before we fast forward to the ruling, which happened a few days ago, it is worth talking a little bit about the entire mechanism that is in-app purchases. Now, both Apple and Google require developers to use their in-app purchase system for the 30% commission. However, Google doesn't really enforce it that much. Apple enforces it a great deal because Apple reviews every single app and every single app revision that goes into their app store. And because they're putting human eyeballs on app revisions and new apps, they're able to spot when people are using a payment system other than Apple's. But Apple takes it one step further. They prohibit any mechanism that a company might use to try to convince their users to buy things through the app in another way besides their in-app purchases. Now, to be clear, this does not mean I think that in-app purchases are necessarily evil, or I even think that a 30% commission is evil, because they are providing a service. They're providing a managed payment system, and they're making it very convenient for somebody to make a purchase in their app. And they're doing so because they are using their payment method that is already built into their Apple account. So this offers extraordinary convenience for the user, and it means probably more purchases for the company. And because the payments that Apple is really after is digital goods, it means that people are buying what is effectively an update to a database value. Like if somebody buys 500 coins for a game, that's the equivalent of just going into a database and changing a 0 to a 500. But what Epic Games and other people are taking issue with is not the existence of this system, it's the fact that it's compulsory. It's the fact that Apple is saying you must use this system, you must pay us 30%, and there's no way around it. Rather than saying, here's a feature where you can collect payments through our app. It's completely voluntary. If you want to use your own, that's great, but it's probably going to come at some inconvenience. As far as the ruling goes, the court actually sided with Apple with every single piece of the lawsuit other than the in-app purchases. The court stated that forcing Epic Games to use in-app purchases is indeed an anti-competitive practice. And I would tend to agree with that ruling. The second part of the ruling was that Apple is not a monopoly. And that is a ruling that I also agree with. It's hard to assert that Apple is a monopoly when their iOS platform isn't even the majority market shareholder. Fortunately, the only ruling that mattered in this lawsuit that was really impactful for the small developer was the in-app purchase thing. And now that that ruling has came down, what this means is developers who do not want to use Apple's in-app purchase system with the 30% commission no longer have to. Another reason this is good is because I believe there were some mobile app developers that are actually forced into the Apple in-app payment system even though they don't need to. It's worth clarifying that Apple's in-app payment system is not required for everything, and in fact there are things that Apple explicitly states you should not use the Apple payment system. These are things like peer-to-peer payments, these are things like buying physical goods, and these are things like buying subscriptions to things that actually require humans to spend time on it. So if you're Venmo and one user sends $10 from their account to $10 from another account, you obviously don't want to pay 30% of that to Apple. And Apple doesn't want 30% of that anyways because it's a peer-to-peer payment. It can't really work like that. What Apple's really after is the purely digital goods that are being sold in probably mobile games mostly. But I do want to tell you a little story about an encounter I had with Apple where they tried to force me into using their in-app payment system when my use case clearly did not require it. So about 2 years ago, I authored an iOS app for a client I was doing as a commercial project, and when I published it to the App Store, they rejected it, saying that it failed to use their in-app payment system. The only way they would have known that users were making payments through this app is they would have reviewed the app directly themselves, and that means that they should have also noticed that people were buying physical products and subscriptions for physical products and not digital goods. However, that did not stop them from rejecting the app. Now, if I as the developer did not know any better about the rules, I might have said, oh, I got to use their in-app payment system, and maybe I then go use the in-app payment system. But because I did know the rules, I resisted it, and I replied to them back and forth for a few messages, and ultimately they let the app through and I never heard about it again. But this kind of makes me think that by default, when Apple sees somebody paying in an app, they just immediately assume that it's digital goods and they just reject the app, hoping that the developer will either use the payment system, even though they don't need to, or reply, and then when they put any kind of resistance up against it, Apple will just say, okay, you can go through. And I find this to be pretty problematic and pretty concerning. So I'm quite happy that the ruling that came down will completely alleviate this problem. The way Epic Games had framed this lawsuit with Apple was the little guy versus the big guy, but in reality it's just the big guy versus the bigger guy. Although to Apple's $2 trillion valuation, Epic Games' $30 billion valuation seems like peanuts in comparison. But for the small developers who are multi-hundreds of thousands, maybe punching into the 1 million valuation, this is kind of a big thing. As far as I'm concerned, those are the people I care about. I do not care about two giant companies arguing with each other. I just don't. So in closing, I think this is a good thing. I think there is still more progress to be had on this front. Apple still exerts an extraordinary stranglehold on both their platforms and their developers, and to a lesser degree, so does Google. All three companies will undoubtedly be in litigation until the end of time, so we'll have to just see what comes out from all that as it happens. If you have any questions about anything you heard in this video, or if you want to give me your thoughts on the Epic Games versus Apple thing, please do so below in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. Take care.